Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Dressed up a little nice for you tonight. Actually, I went out with the guy that I think I introduced him in one video at Expona, but he's got a friend of mine that bought the Nxtremes, Estalon Forces, the Griffin, Apex amp. I built him a server that included dinosaur bone, and that's just probably half of what he's got in terms of audiophile equipment, much less everything else. In the membership section, I think I even featured his new Ferrari Stradale. I mean, it's amazing. Living a good life. Nicest guy, one of the most generous, just cool guy. So had fun with him tonight. Came in though relatively early. We might go to Vegas together soon, so I might have some good footage for members as well in that. But also, I am going next week to the gentleman that ran the room at the Aries Surratt room. That was a phenomenal room, obviously, very innovative, cool equipment, but he has amazing systems as well. So, yeah. Good thing I'm not the jealous type, because some of the stuff I see on a regular basis is crazy. I mean, and quite frankly, this video is part 2 of the Kii Audio and Linkwitz video. I'm going to start doing some comparisons and give you some music clips. But that, again, is relatively speaking to all the other stuff that was at the show. It's actually in a modest budget range. The Linkwitz, I think, $20,000 with the amps and the crossover in that budget range, all assembled. You could do it in a kit form for much less, I think even less than half maybe. So it puts you in the range of the GR Research Nxtremes, which I'll give a little bit of a comparison today, because you are getting the crossover and the amps combined with the Linkwitz, which is really cool. But what I wanted to mainly focus on today is something that I haven't been able to do much in terms of analyze speakers comparison. Everybody's always asked me, compare one to the other. And you're going to get tons of people that will do that online. And they'll do best, worst, this, that, and the other. But it's really, I don't do it just to be politically correct and not hurt anybody's feelings. It's really just a primitive way. If you're going to say something's the best after hearing it at a show in a room that you're not familiar with, and then compare it to another room that is totally different, there's no way you can make these judgments of what's best or worst or whatnot. You can see what's impressive, what are intriguing you, and piquing your interest, but that's no way to make a final call. And so one reason why I don't do a lot of comparisons when I hear this gear of how does it compare to my GR Research and Nxtremes is because I have a huge advantage here. Quite frankly, what I got here I like better on 98 point something % of the time. I will hear some things that shows that like, oh, this is something better than I have at home, but it'll be isolated snippets because I have the advantage of a room dedicated to my preferences. I have kind of the distance I am from the speakers, creating this immersion that I like for this room. I have Wisdom Audios for a different presentation in a different room. But the key thing is I have DSP. So it's very unfair for me to compare a speaker that's in my room and DSP to my taste to the B&W 801 D4s. I have to disassociate myself from the fact that it's not dialed in, it's not in the perfect room, and kind of look for traits and qualities and give you a recommendation and kind of features of that speaker that I think would be appealing, and assuming if I put it in here and DSP'd it as well, what kind of ceiling of performance I could get. And with the Linkwitz and the Kii, what's nice though here is that they both were DSP'd. Although I'll have clips where we turn it on and off, both of them had the audio lens DSP, which, as I mentioned in the prior video, I could tell really within the first minute of listening to a song that it was DSP'd. It had that advantage that innate speakers typically don't have. And so I feel more comfortable being able to do a comparison, even though the rooms are different. So in terms of soundstage and immersion and difference, they will be different. But I'm going to take that out of the equation and just talk about where you might want to choose maybe the Kii, the Linkwitz, GR Research, or maybe Maggie 20.7s. These are all ones in that ballpark of 20,000 and above. And when you do it yourself, I factor in, like, if you paid somebody to make it for you, it probably would cost 20,000 plus to have these made for you. Especially if you get a car level paint job and all that stuff. It's a lot of work, So we're not splitting hairs on cost here. The Kiis are a little bit more, close to 40,000, but includes all the amps, all the DACs, everything in the food chain for your system. So I'm kind of just ballparking these all in the same budget range. If you can afford these, obviously these aren't budget systems. I'm just being honest with you. The closest thing to a budget is buying this and using some small chip amps like Danny uses, very economical, not using DSP, all that stuff. And you can even build subs. So that's one thing I also wanted to talk about is the bass section and subs, because that's going to be a very differentiating factor as well between these three speakers. So like I said, it's tough to dive into what all I'm going to talk about, but let's talk about first the Linkwitz speaker compared to the Kii. And really what I'm going to do is attach a video at the end where we have music clips with the Kii, and we did the Kii after the Linkwitz. So what this will give you is a chance to hear our innate raw conversations that Fernando and I were having, and my raw impressions of what I was hearing between the Linkwitz and the Kii on the spot. Nothing produced, nothing curated, nothing pre-planned, just what we were talking about. And so that will give you a lot of feel for what my true impressions are. Not that I would give you anything other than that anyway, but it's always best to get that raw impression. And really, to summarize though, for those that don't want to watch the music clips video and all that, really what it boils down to with the Kii versus the Linkwitz is a taste profile for the Kii. Both of these speakers with DSP can be made to sound however you want them to sound in a lot of ways. But based on what I heard, and I think based on the driver complement and the general profile that they're set up for, I think that the Kii is designed for being on the metrics of measurements and in terms of pushing the envelope in terms of measurements and performance from signal to noise ratio of everything inside, amplifier, DAC wise, and sound wise, is for hitting certain metrics, objective measurements that are state of the art. And certainly when you listen to it, you feel like you're listening to a state of the art box speaker that's extremely analytical, detailed, punchy bass. There's really nothing to fault of the Kii other than the fact that I heard the Linkwitz first, and I thought that the Linkwitz being open baffle and having a slight bit of, I think Fernando put it well, as a romantic quality to it. I put, and a lot of people use the word organic a lot, but what I usually, the flavor of the Linkwitz is such that it struck the right balance to me of being just enough detail, just enough everything I want in terms of high-end, high-fidelity metrics, but giving me that just a little bit of flavor that was just kept in my mind after I left. That's one of the subliminal things I think about and like to judge is I use a lot of subliminal feelings to determine really what I like the best. And one thing is when I'm listening, do I just innately nod my head with the music? Are my toes tapping with it? Those are just subliminal cues that just tell you that you're liking what you hear, that things are resonating with you. And then the other thing that I'm talking about here is that after I leave, which speaker was I thinking about the most? Was it the Kii and what I heard of the Kii, or was it the Linkwitz? And quite frankly, it's actually the Linkwitz, which is actually a little bit cheaper, that I kept thinking about in terms of the performance I heard resonating with me the best, because I think it comes down to the open baffle, and that the Kii, the way it was designed and EQ'd and just general, was more of an analytical monitor type speaker that is probably better on a check mark of metrics. If you check mark everything, if you have a list of how you judge a speaker. But one thing, I was talking to Steve McCormick earlier tonight, and he kind of understood what I said when I said this comparison, because he was asking me, what I thought of those as well. And it's almost like when I go into the benchmark audio room at shows. And as you probably know, benchmark audio gets super high marks for reaching very high level performance standards, the signal to noise ratio. Their benchmark amp has super low distortion and gets measurements that are extremely high. And I've owned benchmark DAC 2s, 3s. I have a DAC 1 still in my gaming rig. I've had all the benchmark DACs before, and they're very good. One thing I've just noticed every time I go into their rooms, and even with their speakers and whatnot, there's nothing to complain about. It's just a case of, it's more of a sterile hi-fi sound that is certainly ideal for if you're in a recording studio mastering and you want to hear everything in the recording, and you're not looking for a flavor. You're not looking for anything to resonate outside of the bounds. And so on a metrics level, thumbs up in every metric. And even in bass, I think the bass of the Kii is better than the Linkwitz in terms of just raw empirical impact and just texture even. I think the problem, I would say, with the Linkwitz in terms of the bass is the same thing, reason why I didn't buy and build the open baffle bass subs from Danny. Not that there's anything wrong with the open baffle rhythmic sub bass in terms of, on the performance metric, it's reference quality. But when you get past that tier of reference quality, are you going to go with a Rel sealed box or this rhythmic open baffle or some ported sub maybe, or some transmission line? For me, the only negative to the open baffle bass, and I did notice this with the Linkwitz, it's just like at Danny's. If you watch my video when I visited Danny Ritchie's place and heard the GR Research and Nxtremes before building them and buying them, I wanted to go out there and see them and hear them. And I decided to build these, but not the subs. And the only thing I could say, reason why I didn't build the subs, is on a certain songs at certain volume levels with open baffle bass, and I've mentioned this before, mechanically, the room is your box if the open baffle sub. And it requires major size drivers to get that 20 hertz. And there's a lot of mechanical movement of air with these. And so when you are playing loud and when you are playing bass heavy material, it just naturally calls attention to itself from a mechanical creation of air movement in the room that is somewhat more obvious than maybe a sealed box, one driver like my Rel 25 sub that can get the same pressure level in a sealed box. It doesn't call attention to itself as much. And so sometimes, I even think I mentioned it in the video at Danny Ritchie, I could point to where the sub was, certain aspects. 90-something% of the time, no. But there's just certain aspects. Same thing here with the Linkwitz. There were certain things with the bass being the open baffle that I could point to it and say, okay, that's open baffle bass. I'm not noticing that. Not bad, still reference quality, but I'm capturing where it is and coming from, and that's slightly less than what I prefer with sealed box bass. Now, open baffle mid-range or even mid-bass, these are great. What the brilliance of this speaker is that most of the bass, the higher end bass, the mid-bass and up, is handled by these speakers, and that's actually not creating a lot of excursion, especially when you roll this off and don't make it do 40, 30, 20, or even subsonic, infrasonic frequencies. I use a crossover to do that. These don't like to play loud, though they can play loud and dynamic compared to most any other speaker. But I'm talking about if you want to compare it to Nxtremes, if you want to compare it to the best in the world, no, these do not like to play sub 20 hertz frequencies super loud. That's when you're pushing the envelope. This will be more dynamic speaker than most any other speaker in its price point and within reason. But if you're going to start comparing it to cost no object, massive pro drivers and stuff like that, that's when these don't like major excursion, when you start making them do major excursion. And that's why I roll it off, and that's why I use the mini DSP SHD, because I never make them work harder than they need to be, and they stay in their sweet spot. Pretty much anything 70 hertz or down, they're starting to roll off, and I'm not making them do anything, call attention to themselves. And that's really where open baffle bass really pays off. When you start getting below that, I think the impact of a sealed box sub really, for my taste at least, it disappears, but also gives you that impulse and pump, thump and pump. That's what people want. Most people, I find, want with their bass. And especially if you can do stereo pair, yeah, it's what I prefer. And so the Kii was able to do a sealed box bass with that cardioid bass pattern that I think was better than the Linkwitz. But what I remembered the most leaving Fernando's place was the open baffle mid-range and top end, and Chantel Chamberlain playing, singing was very high level, at reference level, for really as good as I've heard her sound in that kind of setup, big room. In terms of, I think that is something that will be extremely appealing to people. And you're still getting reference level bass. It may not be as punchy and dynamic as the Kii or with a REL 25, but still that open baffle, big drivers can really fill a room. That room that we were at Fernando's didn't have any boundaries. It was open to the entire house. So, that's what I was factoring as well. Tremendously high bar that if you're with the Linkwitz, I think you're at a speaker that you have very little trade-offs. The only other thing I will say with Linkwitz, just in general, and this would be a comparison to a line source like the 20.7s, because that's another thing that's in that budget range. 20.7s would be about 20 grand or so, but then you have to add amplification, which will bring it much higher. Especially they're going to need a lot. They're a line source, so you will probably get more of that floor to ceiling massive soundstage and presence. But I think the Linkwitz, with its more dynamic drivers, will give that acoustical wave that makes it a little more versatile. A lot of times with the Maggies, they don't give you that acoustic wave that people like. So if you play EDM, rap, rock, pop, something that where you're used to, at least if you go to a live concert, they're amplified by PA speakers. You're used to hearing it in a different way than what a planar and an open baffle can give you. Now for vocals, acoustics, orchestra, not a big deal at all. In fact, that's where the Maggie 20.7s or such would be probably your choice. But the Linkwitz will give that nice sweet spot to give you Maggie 20.7 level, almost floor to ceiling height. It's got that rear tweeter, which really does fill up the room really nice. Dynamics, because the drivers are pistonic and do give you a little more of that wave, but it's open baffle, so it's not shouting at you and doesn't have the box coloration. And especially with the Panzerholz, man, you're not. And then if you notice, the frame is totally separated from that bass module, so nothing vibrating with the bass is going to be transferred to those other drivers. And let me tell you, I've had tons of speakers. Every single speaker with a big driver translates that vibration to the other to the cabinet and inevitably will affect the other drivers or create a resonance within the cabinet itself. And I even mentioned that, hearing a little bit of that at Tecton, albeit much lower price profile, you have to understand that. But you can hear cabinet resonance once you get used to it. And this one had no cabinet resonances, and that's a huge benefit. Huge. I mean, I can't tell you how big a deal it is for me. That's one of the things why I wanted to do Panzer on this, because I got tired of dealing with speakers like the other ones I have. These over here, those had cabinet resonances. There's not much of a cabinet to it, but those panels would resonate if you played loud enough. And even the grills on them would resonate. So don't overlook that aspect. If you haven't encountered that problem, maybe you're not playing loud enough or whatnot, but at some point you will, or at some point you will become sensitive to it. So the way I would talk about this is dynamic material that you listen to, especially EDM, rock, pop, and you like a true window on the performance in terms of mastering studio quality speaker. I think the Kii and a box speaker that is form factor and more attractive than the weird Linkwitz, the Kii Audio is going to be at the top of your list of something you should audition for sure. It's analytical without being harsh, sibilant. That's often people say analytical is a nice way of saying that the speaker's harsh and all this. It will definitely steer you clear of recordings that aren't that great and let you know, but I was not hearing any sibilance, distortion, or those issues. I was just hearing, okay, this is telling me a little bit too much that this recording is compressed or compared to the Linkwitz, which had that perfect balance in my mind between giving an acoustic wave and elements of the Kii and a great box speaker, but also not being too much on the framework of a Maggie, of not being more suited to certain music versus, Maggies are gonna, you can get some Vox maybe, have stronger magnets. Those do a lot better in terms of those panel speakers. But most people that have those panel speakers or even electrostatics, you can make those electrostatics flap and hit the excursion max. Same thing with Maggies. You play them super loud, super dynamic material, Billie Eilish, bad guy. So certain things are going to put those out of the realm of being the most ideal speaker design. I think the Linkwitz has that sweet spot of great trade-offs with very minor trade-offs and so many pluses at a relatively modest budget if you build them yourself. So then if you build them yourself, how does it compare to the Geo Research and Nxtremes? Well, I do think the drivers in the Linkwitz, the CS drivers, I've had my personal experience with the drivers here has not been good. The Peerless drivers, I've had 3 of these mid-ranges, which are actually the most expensive one, and one of the smaller ones I've had to have either fixed or replaced. So am I unlucky? That's what I'm told. I'm unlucky. But just in general, I think the CS drivers are chosen by most manufacturers over Peerless. I give a little bit of edge to Linkwitz on the driver quality, but it really doesn't depend on the quality. Like, obviously, in both speakers, you could do a plasma tweeter, AMT tweeter, diamond tweeter, beryllium tweeter that will be better than probably either of these speakers innately and on metrics. But what both of these speakers do well is pick the right tweeter and integrate it well with the rest of the drivers such that it's super coherent. And that's what I care about more than performance metrics of a tweeter. Yes, I can understand this AMT sounds great, this diamond, beryllium, plasma tweeter. But if it calls too much of attention to itself, the Dyne Audio Esitar always called attention to itself on all these bookshelves. Everybody threw that in every bookshelf, and it would dominate the speaker. Both of these speakers do a great job of integrating what isn't the upper end, top end in terms of technology for a tweeter, but they integrate well. And so I would say that the CS, though, on the other drivers, a slight edge to the Linkwitz. But as a whole, I think the tall point source array here does give me a little bit better floor to ceiling, almost the Maggie 20.7 floor to ceiling immersion, and bigger than the Linkwitz. Almost gets to the ceiling, very close, not quite to the level of this one. And then if you pair this with a REL 25 sub, which then adds quite a bit of cost, and you probably would need 2 of them to get the same performance level of the open baffle bass drivers, or beat the open baffle bass drivers of Linkwitz, then you're talking about, even more money, or at least parity there. It would be a tough call for me. I think the advantage that the Linkwitz has is that I really like the fact that you get all the amplification and the active crossover. When you're talking about being future-proof, when you're talking about not having parts decay over time, solder, wiring, all this stuff that's extra, when you have driver dedicated to each speaker, it's really good. Now, am I in any hurry to replace these though? No. I mean, like when I come back here, it's not like I feel like I'm missing anything. And in many cases, it's still superior, the GR Research, what I've got here. But it also has to do with how I've tweaked the DSP, and I've got the REL 25 sub, not the open baffle sub of the Linkwitz. So, I'm trying to dance around the fact that I still prefer what I have here as a whole. It's not the exact parity in terms of comparison, but depending on your taste, it will be very easy for me to see somebody blindfold them. Some people will say, I want that Kii, the punchy bass, the everything metric wise is just A+ or perfect. Some people are going to listen to that Linkwitz and fall in love with the vocals and the coherency, and will like that open baffle bass. They don't play it super loud. They'll never hear that open baffle bass call attention to itself. It will be so pure, no cabinet resonances, each driver being driven by its own amp, active crossover. That is going to be a winner easily. A lot of people blind testing. And then some people will listen to my system and the GR Research, and they're going to be like, "Oh, wow, that's kind of in between both the Linkwitz and the Kii. It's kind of got some elements of the Linkwitz, the open baffle nature, but then it's got the punchy bass with the sealed box REL sub." So that's kind of how I would place them. Is that the Linkwitz is on this side, open baffle all the way from tweeter to woofers, and if you like that, this is going to be the speaker for you, especially for certain rooms and you want all your amplification, everything taken care of. That's going to be the answer for you. GR Research, kind of how I've hybridized it with the sealed box sub and rolling it off. I'm not using these inherently like Danny uses his. I'm doing crossovers to roll these off to the subs, and to different subs than what he uses. This is going to be closer to the Kii in terms of its bass performance, but it's not as analytical. This tweeter here is good and integrates well. It's not as hyper detailed and analytical as the Kii is in certain areas. And then the Kii also has this cardioid bass, which I'm still a little bit unsure how. I just know it sounded good. I just couldn't detect if it really went down low directional. I just know that one thing that was really interesting, when he turned off the lower bass module and just had the top module, and you'll even hear it in a video, maybe if I release that video, it sounded actually heavier to me with just the top bass module. And I started thinking about this after, and really that's the nature of these arrays and whatnot. It's not that you're getting more bass. Now, obviously, if we were playing loud and pipe organ music that would go down to 20 hertz, then I would hear probably more of the delta between the bottom module and the top module because of the extension advantages that those extra drivers give me. But we were listening to a song that really didn't even have material down there, and actually the top module sounded heavier than with the bottom module. And part of it is because if you listened in the first video, the cardioid on the top doesn't go down as far as when it does the cardioid radiation when you have the bottom module. And I've seen this with bookshelf speakers too. When you have bookshelf speakers, a lot of people, the Borisons is a very great example, both in Florida and Exponent. People will go into these Borisons with the small ones and be like, I don't know which one's playing. You know, it's you can't tell that from the big one with all the array of drivers. And it's not that the smaller one can't play down. It's just having more excursion. And then it's creating more volume in that box with the drivers. So the heaviness that I was hearing, more so with just the top module playing of the Kii, was probably related to that and the fact that that driver was doing more excursion and heavier sounding than when you split it up among the array. Then you get actually more texture, nuance, finesse, not so much extra volume, unless you were playing pipe organ and whatnot. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't get fooled by these bookshelves. They can produce fairly decent low-level bass in certain volume levels. The key is, what kind of texture, though, do you get? The arrays and stuff give you quicker settling time because they're spreading out the load, and a little more finesse. And so that's sometimes the value you get, not just lower extension, which intuitively you think. All right, guys, I'm at 30 minutes plus here. I'm rambling on, I guess. I hope I'm not rambling too much, but I wanted to give you as much as I could feedback, because I've gotten a lot of emails. Tell me what you heard, and even some phone calls. So hopefully this addresses most of what I heard. And again, I'll attach some videos at the end where you could start listening to music clips and hear some things on your own. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, sign up, subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon.